Today we're going to compare the Sony ZV-1F to the Sony ZV-1. We're going to look at the similarities and differences and figure out which one of those two cameras is better for you. In the meantime, let me know in the comments section which one of these two cameras you like better and why. I didn't know how the ZV-1F would take to our Sony community, but so far it seems pretty favorable. The goal of this video is to better help you make a purchase decision on either one of these cameras or both, depending on what you're going to use them for. I've had the ZV-1 for over 2 years and I've made all different types of videos about it. So when Sony announced the Sony ZV-1F, I was super excited about it, especially at that price point starting at $499 US, whereas the ZV-1 comes in at $698 US. Before you disregard the ZV-1F as being too simple for you, hold on a second because I have some points to cover that might make it more appealing to you, and that's what we're going to cover today on the Film Alliance. Both cameras were created for content creators, but the ZV-1F had more of an emphasis for vlogging, and that's easy to see when we look at the 20mm fixed lensed f2.0 on the ZV-1F, whereas the ZV-1 has a 24 to 70mm f1.8. Before we get into the differences, let's first look at the similarities. That way we have better context when we get to the differences. Both cameras have the same sensor, both have flip screens which are 3 inches, they both use the same exact battery, both can shoot in the same frame rate and resolution, and both have extremely fast autofocus. Also, both of them have active stabilization, which does crop in a bit. We'll talk more about that later in the video. Both use the same SD cards, and both have touchscreen, which I find extremely helpful, especially when I'm on a gimbal, but the ZV-1F has an updated display, which is super nice, especially if you're a vlogger. Both have USB charging, HDMI output, and Wi-Fi, although the USB on the ZV-1F is a USB-C 2.0, which will give you a faster transfer speed. Both have a similar looking body and also similar button placement, so if you're a ZV-1 user, if you jump over to the ZV-1F, you won't have to relearn muscle memory in order to get to your buttons. Now that we got all that I could think of out of the way, let's jump into the differences. The first being the price, which we already covered in the beginning. The Sony ZV-1F comes in at $499 US, and the ZV-1 is $698 US. I know there's a school of thought out there that's disappointed with the ZV-1F, and they're thinking, why is Sony wasting their time making these vlogging cameras when the majority of the market, or most of us, just want to make cinematic looking films and short films and things of that nature. But if you think about it, there's millions and tens of millions of content creators out there who are filming things every single day, and it would be super easy and helpful to have a little vlogging camera with them so that they could just turn it on themselves and maybe do behind the scenes shots. And that's one of the main reasons why I love the idea of this camera, because it's a perfect behind the scenes camera. So now that we got that covered, now let's talk about the body and the ergonomics, the weight and the size, so we can see if there really is a big difference between these two cameras, because that does make a difference, especially when your arm is fully extended and you're vlogging all day. The ZV-1F is a bit wider, a bit taller, and a bit deeper, which means that you won't be able to use the same exact cage that you used on your ZV-1 on the ZV-1F. So as we speak right now, the people who make camera cages are probably printing out their designs so that they can make a cage for the ZV-1F. Now, I don't think a lot of the entry-level creators who are buying the ZV-1F are going to need or want a cage. But then again, because it does have the same body style as the ZV-1, they'll probably quickly realize that that little hand grip on the side is not enough, and they're going to need to upgrade the grip if they don't want it to slip out of their hands. Although the ZV-1F is a little bit wider, taller, and deeper, it does come in a little bit lighter, coming in at 256 grams with the battery, and the ZV-1 coming in at 294 grams. Like I said, the button placement on the ZV-1F is very similar, if not identical, to the ZV-1, so if you were to customize the outside of the ZV-1F, I would do it the same way that we did it with the ZV-1 in the video that I created called Cinematic Settings for the ZV-1. And the first thing that I would do is customize the function menu so that auto white balance, audio record levels, and zebras are all in there, because I use that stuff all the time. Both cameras have the same picture profiles, and I set up the ZV-1 to have a very similar looking picture profile to S-Cinetone, which is on my A7S III. It gives you the realist to life colors, but it's super easy to do a small little grade and you're getting a great image out of it. So that would be the same exact picture profile that I'm going to customize inside the ZV-1F. But if you were trying to get some cinematic looking footage to go along with your vlog, then I would shoot in S-Log 3 so that you'll have more room to grade and post. The menu system on the ZV-1F is the updated menu system that we've been seeing on the FX3 and the A7S III, which in my opinion is not any better or any worse than the old menu system. I found that the old menu system was pretty easy to navigate, and I'm just finally getting a hold and a hang of how the new menu system works and operates. And when you're in a closed environment like this, it's pretty easy just to kind of navigate your menu system and see what's there. But when you're actually on set and there's time and there's pressure, that's when I really don't like the new menu system, because I have to dive into like some of the deepest parts of the menu just to find what I'm looking for. And a lot of times I'll have to search on the internet what I'm looking for in order to change that setting inside the new menu system. Whereas the old menu system was pretty easy. I was able to at least figure out where it might be. As a side note, I wish that they didn't include the photography and video menu system in the same menu system, because it makes the menu system so bulky and hard to navigate. When it comes to photography, both cameras shoot in 20.1 megapixels, which means both have the same exact image quality, but the ZV-1 can shoot in RAW, whereas the ZV-1F only can shoot in JPEG. And that's a pretty big deal if you're into photography, because you want to be able to shoot RAW so that you can better color grade your photos and have more room to grade in post. So in that sense, the ZV-1 would be better if you wanted to have more of a hybrid shooter, something that can shoot video and photo. Both cameras have active stabilization, but with the ZV-1F having that 20mm wide angle lens, it's really gonna be the equivalent of about 25mm when you have active stabilization on. And the ZV-1 is about 29 to 30mm equivalent when you have active stabilization on. Just to give you an idea of how much it crops in when you have stabilization turned to active. Now when it comes to low light, the ZV-1F's max ISO is 6400 and the ZV-1 can shoot up to 12,800 ISO. I would never advise going past 1600 for either of these cameras, because once you do, you really start to introduce a lot of noise. Instead of cranking the ISO up, I would actually just introduce more light. The ZV-1F does not have a built-in ND filter, and the ZV-1 does. It's actually a 3-stop ND filter that you can turn on and off, which is super helpful when you're outside shooting bright environments or you have a super bright background. I've actually used the ND filter on the ZV-1 indoors when I was in a super bright environment and I didn't want to crank my exposure settings all crazy. However, the ZV-1F does have a 40.5mm thread on the outside of the lens so that you can add polarizers or ND filters to it. I'll personally use a variable ND filter that I can just kind of turn. That way I don't have to crank the settings all crazy. That's something that the ZV-1 does not have. The ZV-1F has some fancy features such as shot mark or mark shot, where you can just edit your little clip inside the camera and then export it, so you don't have to export the entire clip and then edit it in post-production. The ZV-1 is old school, where you have to export the entire clip and then you can just edit it in post, whatever editing software you're using. Both cameras have the same exact internal microphone system, so you're not going to get the best audio in the world, but it will get you by in a pinch. If you really want it to enhance your audio, then just get yourself a little micro Shaka mic that you can mount to the top of either of these cameras, and it will really take your audio to the next level. I use the little Comica micro Shaka mic, and it is awesome. Unfortunately, both of these cameras don't have a headphone port, which is pretty surprising, because a lot of times when you're out and you're doing a vlog or something, you want to be able to not only monitor your audio while you're recording to make sure your levels are right, but also maybe on playback you want to make sure that nothing crazy happened while you were recording, because you don't want to get home and then realize that your footage is unusable because the audio doesn't work. That's why it's important to set up the audio record level in your function menu so that you can at least visually see that you're not peaking. Both have product showcase and background defocus. I don't use either of those, but if you were to be kind of like a content creator and you didn't want the cameras to continue to be focused on your face and you wanted to hold up a product, put a product in front of the lens, then it would automatically focus on that product. Right now I use the ZV-E10 with the Viltrox 13mm f1.4 to get my BTS, my behind the scenes footage, and it would be super helpful if I had a ZV-1F that I could just pull out of my bag. I don't really have to set the lens or anything like that. Now you can also get behind the scenes with the ZV-1, but that 24mm lens that's on the ZV-1 when it's fully wide is a lot different than what you'll get with 20mm out of the ZV-1F. And just place it on the tripod and do a lot of behind the scenes stuff. Especially at that price point, I can see why a lot of creators will pick up the ZV-1F for that exact reason. Both the ZV-1F and the ZV-1 have their place in the environment. I think that the ZV-1F is not only great for vloggers, but I think it's also gonna be great for people who like to do behind the scenes like myself, or anybody else out there who might have a YouTube channel or client work, or even as a B cam to your ZV-1. And I also think Sony was targeting people who usually vlog on their phones or use their phones to make content, to giving them the ZV-1F, which has a flip screen so they can actually see what they're doing rather than just making videos with their phone. So that's my take on both of these cameras. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it better helps you understand which one of these two cameras is right for you. Until the next video, I'm Joe with the Film Alliance. Have a nice week.